I've been wanting to read this chart for Putin for quite some time, but I've almost been hesitant to do so because I know that there's been speculation over whether or not the information that's publicly available is actually his information. It's really, really hard when it comes to someone like Putin, as obviously there's quite a bit in relation to Putin as a whole that is shrouded in mystery. But I'm going to give this my best shot with this 9:30 time, which has been reported as being his birth time, which gives him a Libra Sun, Gemini Moon, Scorpio Ascendant. I could see a Scorpio Ascendant for Putin. It's kind of funny because I was looking at pictures of him, like trying to figure out if I saw like Scorpio rising features in his face. And when I was looking at his eyes, I was like, that's normally where you would see Plutonian kind of energy emanating. I was thinking to myself, like, I can see it, but I can also see this Taurus emphasis, where he almost reminds me of Taurus rising people. And then I realized that he does have in this chart Venus opposite Jupiter in Taurus, and so that might be what I'm picking up on. Earth energy as a whole has this tendency to give off this very unimpressed kind of emphasis to it, and that's what I was seeing in his eyes, where although there is like a mystery and an allure that is present in his physical, you can see the unimpressed look. It's funny because of the language barriers, it's really hard to read like his communication and read more like into him energetically. But when I was looking at his face, I got this feeling that he could have this tendency to like relay information simultaneously withholding information and have this like death grip kind of on his ability to not budge. But it was interesting to me because when I was thinking about that, I was getting like this kind of trickery to that as well, and that would be very characteristic of a Gemini moon. I bet that Putin has a way of coming off as very immovable to people, where when he has made up his mind in relation to something, he's not moving, he's not changing. This would be even more so true if whatever he had made up his mind on did involve like an element of security and ultimately his security being threatened. But even more if his beliefs were involved in this, because with Jupiter and Taurus, like his beliefs are very firm. And I'm sure that this is very much so evident in his relationships, in his partnerships, specifically like marriage, romantic partnerships was what I was kind of being pinged to with that, but I was also getting a lot about business partnerships. Whatever I was picking up on was like very selfish feeling, but it was like Putin having this tendency to give and sometimes give in a material way, but then like pulling back from it, but something with his desires like needing to be met in some way. It was really strange, but I was looking at this Mercury, Saturn, Neptune 12th house emphasis that he has going on within this chart. But namely, something about the square from these planets to Uranus in the 9th house for him. And there was like something that popped into my head in relation to intelligence agencies, intelligence community. And I was wondering like really deeply whether or not like people who have tried to figure him out is a good way of putting it, if they seem to have this frustration that they deal with in relation to Putin in particular, where it's almost like he is one step ahead of them. If he does indeed have this Mercury, Neptune, Saturn in the 12th, but I mean even in general, if he just has the Mercury-Neptune conjunction, his intuition is strong. It is clear. It would probably cause him to make very sudden moves, very sudden changes at that. What I was just kind of wondering when looking at that is whether or not like Putin has this tendency to get intuitive insight into things before they occur, and the intelligence community might think that this is just his intelligence, like they're this good, they can do this, but it might be Putin himself as well that has a gift with this, where it's not even like about their gathering as it is him knowing something's coming, something's up. Especially when it comes to things that could potentially lead to sudden downfall for him. Like he could have a gift in intuiting this himself, in knowing that something isn't right. But this Uranus-Saturn square, like that very well could be like sudden repercussions that he would face from those at a distance. Something like sanctions, legal, would be involved in this. Having Saturn in Libra in the 12th house, I mean, the bulk of this man's karma, we'll say, the things that he struggles with in life, involve his ability to be fair. But when he's not fair and he doesn't take that balanced, peace-oriented, considering all sides, all perspectives route, karma would have a way of coming down on him. And that would be very much so characteristic of the United States in particular, because our natal Saturn within the U.S. chart is within like a 3-4 degree orb of his Saturn. The United States is not really somebody who he wants to mess with per se, because the repercussion is large. But his way out of the madness in situations like this is very, very largely impacted by his power, by his influence. He has Pluto in Leo, sextile this Saturn, as well as Neptune. His ability to charm, his ability to dazzle, his ability to take control in certain situations, especially publicly, and have influence over others, like that is a major asset to him in getting out of sticky situations. And that was really strange. I just heard and play on other people's fears. I wonder if that has anything to do with this Pluto being square Jupiter. The reason why is because I was getting like a feeling of like blowing things up, like the ability to like strike fear, bring fear to people, being like this asset. That has to be the Jupiter-Pluto square, especially when it comes to like fear that threatens security and the ability to spread that fear to others. Because yeah, that Pluto is also sextile his Mercury. I forgot to add that one as well. It's a really interesting thing. I mean, it has the capacity, like the way that that cluster works has the capacity to cause great damage, which obviously, but like a major component of that is the intuitive element of it all. Like he knows exactly what to say to spark fear. He knows exactly what to say to create influence, to step into that power. And he can very literally do so in a way that he is playing on people's insecurities via his intuition. The energy that I feel from this is highly calculating energy. It's very intellectual, definitely, but it's calculated and it's intuitive at that. What could make people feel even more uncomfortable, though, with Putin is the fact that very often, he can do these things, he can make these moves very, very suddenly, very quickly, very unexpectedly. And I am willing to bet that it is, in an instance where either he is intuitively, receiving this insight into something being off, or it's in an instance where he's facing sudden repercussion. I think one of the kind of scariest things, I guess you could say, about Jupiter square Pluto and Pluto being conjunct his MC is the fact that he has this ability, due to his influence, to get other people on board. And it would be, as I said before, very much so, due to the ability to really play on people's fears, and to do so in a way that is individualized. He can intuitively tell what it is that would rile people up, frighten people. But even worse, there's the unconscious probably portion to it too, where his belief is fueling this. It's not like he's just trying to mess with people, probably to a certain degree, but a lot of it is fueled by his own belief and his own threat to security, or feelings of his security being threatened. I think to go like deeper into that, like what I find to be fascinating about that influence is that he does have that Pluto conjunct his MC as well as his south node. So this is a trait that like very much so was learned and utilized earlier in life for him, definitely. But it's not actually the direction that he is here to take. He's not here to be this fear-mongering person. He's not here to push people and sway people by his beliefs and things very publicly and very loudly. He's here more so to embrace this humanitarian purpose, where he's actually considering and trying to make the world a better place, believe it or not. And his ability to do that would be via his openness and his unity with people all around the world, this community, this coming together of people viewing humanity very, very largely as a family. It's very fascinating to me to see somebody who's thrust into the role of playing an evil dictator in a lot of ways. The flip side of that coin, like what he could actually do, what his potential really wants to lead him towards, is unity, global unity. And I suppose even more fascinating, like that global unification, like would actually very much so aid his drives for security. And financially, at that, it would aid him. The outside world does aid him in acquiring and bringing more monetary resources to himself. But as does technology, and potentially even sharing that technology with the world in some capacity. Him having this Libra sun in the 11th house, like he's sitting, his ego is resting within the realm of the people. His friends, his social circles, like all of that is incredibly important to him from the standpoint of invigoration and energy. I don't know enough about Putin's background, family life, home life, etc., but I can say with Sun Square Uranus, he probably had fairly erratic masculine figures that he was surrounded by in his youth. Potentially even figures that were like suddenly called abroad, or maybe they even had views or beliefs, higher-minded kind of themes here, that were different or challenged the status quo in some regard. The masculine was rebellious, and he retains an element of that rebellion within his ego. Unpredictability. And going back to reading this now, I started this on June 7th, and right now it is June 24th. But for some reason before, like I kept feeling blocked and trying to channel insight into this, and I'm not exactly sure why. Probably because a lot is still unfolding in relation to the Ukraine and Russia conflict. We're going to see a lot of that in the US as well, with our Pluto return coming back full swing via the retrograde station of Pluto here around July 11th is when we do hit that exact again, and we're revisiting a time period from later February, specifically to 2021, which was like right around the time that Russia and Ukraine, all of that began to come to head. So I know that the Russia experience, I can say that logically too, obviously, has an impact on the rebirth and transformation that is transpiring in relation to the U.S. economy. But ultimately, yes, I am revisiting this and revising this and trying to see whether or not I can pull out some more information in relation to Putin's chart. The reason why I did decide to kind of come back to this and revisit it is I was sitting here this morning and I got this flash of within this recording saying something about Putin having this ability to play on the fears of people. And I was referencing something about that referring to Pluto square Jupiter, and that being like what I intuitively got was what allows him to do this. But I guess what is crazy about this is that his Jupiter is about to hit the transit north node. I wonder what this effect will be. If I got that intuitively this morning, it's probably due to the fact that he's going to be doing a lot more of this, playing on the fears of other people, and it will be due to him feeling like his security is threatened. But it's fascinating as well because with the North Node hitting his Jupiter, I would theorize that he has some sort of growth period coming, some sort of abundant period coming, especially materialistically, very, very soon at that. Which is so fascinating because, yeah, this Jupiter conjunction, his natal Jupiter at 19 degrees will hit the nodes in July, which is interesting because I mentioned July with the US's Pluto return coming full swing again. And Jupiter being in the 7th house, this is partnership. He's benefiting from partnership. I wonder if we will see a lot more stuff going on in relation to him relying on his allies, potentially China or even maybe Belarus. It's Jupiter, so like doing this in a way that it's even potentially business partnerships or materially satisfactory partnerships that are forming at a distance is possible. Especially because this Jupiter is ruling over his 2nd house, and that's his financial sector. Like it's financial in more than one way. Taurus in general, and Jupiter in Taurus is a financial benefit that Putin already experiences on a day-to-day. But this is monetary. Somebody is going to help him out monetarily, and it potentially will be somebody at a distance, like an ally and a business partnership type theme. It's really fascinating to me that so many speculations have been made about Putin's health. And I say this, it's 11/11, so there's probably something important to this. I say this due to the fact that currently he has transit Chiron transiting his 6th house, which is showing me a wound in relation to the house of health. But the reason why this is fascinating is because Chiron currently is at 16 degrees Aries, and his natal Saturn is at 17 degrees. If there was like a health-related thing, like a major thing, and I know that he's been struggling with health-related stuff for a while, or so I've been told by actual friends that are in Russia. Months and months ago, I told somebody, and I actually wrote it down as well in my notes, that I had seen Putin in what I thought was a shower grabbing his chest region. I thought that it was something heart-related that I was viewing. But then something came out via the media saying that he it was speculated that it could be pancreatic, which is right within the same region, ultimately, that I saw someone grabbing. Like, that's in the chest region. And one of my friends, who is a Russian native, she came forth and told me that he had been suffering with pancreatitis for years, ultimately. But I'm mentioning this specifically because with Chiron currently within a 1-degree orb opposition of his natal Saturn, you could very much so see something like a health condition coming to head at this moment in time, but it's not going to solidify, meaning the worst part of it is to come for him, and he actually has a bit of time before that does come to head in full, as Chiron will not reach that 17-degree point until April 2023. But when it does, if this chart that has been noted for him is accurate on terms of time, he could very well end up in the hospital ultimately, or in a place of seclusion due to poor health. He could be limited by poor health. But with it being 12th house oriented, that's where Saturn is, like you could very well see hospitalization. You could see him having to withdraw to heal himself. It is really fascinating to me, though, because, like, very stereotypically, Chiron in the 6th house, things that would be influencing him from a health-related perspective, it would, traditionally, Aries rules the head, while the Libra energy interacting with this, like, you're seeing the kidneys, you're seeing... I have to brush up on my Libra medical astrology. Lower back, kidneys, ovaries, urinary tract, adrenal glands. With the rulership with Venus involved, like you can also see the throat, the nose. To add Saturn into the mix, you're seeing the skeletal structure. It would be willing to bet the pancreas would be somewhere within the Leo region, if that is indeed what is wrong. Which actually, this is really, really fascinating, because I went on to read that Jupiter can often connect to the pancreas, which is what I just mentioned, being conjunct the nodes. This is actually even more so fascinating to me, because this is like referencing diabetes, and that is what my friend said. Pancreatitis and diabetes. I didn't even know that medically those two connected, but Jupiter in Taurus is sensual. It's weird, but like when I was looking at this, I said something, I slipped up and I said square the nodes, and it is square the nodes within his natal chart. But what I was actually referencing was the conjunction. Long story short, though, I could even see something health-related, a health-related concern correlating to whatever health-related issue it is that he is currently suffering from cropping up again for him when Jupiter was in Aquarius. If this is indeed pancreatic, something's telling me this. And that would have been like around the beginning of 2021 would have activated it. I do wonder if that is indeed accurate, if there is any accuracy to that speculation. But beyond that, in general, like I'm seeing a major potential for a health-related concern, but it came to head, and it's coming to head. Chiron is about to go retrograde, however, and again, it will not reach like the full opposition until April 2023. I do wonder, though, in relation to Putin, what could transpire when Saturn retrograde does roll back to that 22-degree point and opposes Pluto again. This one in particular would be exact on August 3rd, but it's fascinating because he's going to experience the opposition to Pluto in the very beginning of August, but then by the very beginning of September, actually it looks like more so like right around the 10th, 11th, 12th of September, he experiences Saturn conjunct his North Node again. I have a feeling something's coming for Putin. He's going to have some tough lessons to learn in the month of August and September. The month of August, quite literally, I just heard knocked off his pedestal, and that's a very strong possibility. I find it to be incredibly fascinating that Putin has this Chiron in Capricorn in his third house at 7 degrees. And the reason why I say that I find this to be incredibly fascinating is another thing that I did was analyze very, very deeply the charts for both Russia as well as Ukraine. I made a reference at some point about Russia and Ukraine being really, really fascinating due to the fact that the charts that I'm looking at, they were both formed due to the dissolving of the USSR. So they're formed within Russia and Ukraine, ultimately were formed within a few months of each other, which is giving them both a very, very similar purpose. They're both Capricorn North nodes. They both have this purpose to cultivate some sort of authority for themselves. But the reason why I specifically mentioned Putin's Chiron being at 7 degrees is because it's within a 2-degree orb conjunction to Russia's North Node, which is very, very interesting to me. Russia's North Node is 9 degrees Capricorn. It is in the 5th house. It is conjunct Uranus. I had like this major mind-blowing kind of realization when I saw that as well, because I realized like Russia's entire purpose, technology factors into that so largely. But as does spirituality too. Neptune is also involved in this Capricorn stellium that Russia has with the Sun, North Node, Uranus, and Neptune all in Capricorn. And all resting within the 5th house at that. But there is something specifically about Russia as a whole which would activate the wound for Putin in relation to his communication in particular and his authority within his communication. I like to read charts blind. I like to do this from the standpoint of not understanding somebody's background so that I can give an accurate reading and not be biased in the information that I'm presenting. I'm saying this because I don't know a lot about Putin's background, and I think a lot of it is fairly mysterious anyways, but I would be willing to bet that Putin struggled a lot from the standpoint of communication, his entire life ultimately, in his ability to communicate and to be heard in a way that he was seen as a figure of authority. He might even be like slightly soft-spoken. I tried to watch an interview of him and I got like bits and pieces of it, but it was really, really hard. It's hard for me to read into it. I have a gift with this in my ability to listen to what people are saying and very much so analyze their words. But due to the language barrier, it was really, really hard because it was an interpreter that was ultimately telling me what he was saying. So I couldn't get the full energetic impact because it was not in English. However, I wonder if he does have like a demeanor to him that is a little bit soft-spoken in a way. Not soft-spoken, but unsure of himself. That's not to say that he doesn't have that boisterous confidence as well, and he doesn't display that very publicly at that, but actually in his ability to know what he's talking about, and to confidently speak those words. He might even have like insecurities that are very present when watching him communicate. I wonder if there was anything about this and anything that has been written about Putin in relation to like his school age days, certain struggles that he had potentially in education, but specifically in his ability to talk. Because I would be willing to bet that there could have been a lot of instances in Putin's life where he did struggle to talk, he did struggle to communicate, and it was due to feeling insecure in what he was able to relay, to not feeling as though what he was relaying was useful, or that he had a good enough grasp on the subject, or he was being taken seriously by others. Which actually is very, very fascinating, given what I did kind of know earlier when I was recording and talking about Putin. I said something about him having potentially this very intuitive mind and very intuitive ability to know that things were occurring or coming before they were coming. But having a very intuitive mind, I mentioned the mind specifically because Chiron is in the third house, the house of Gemini, the house of Mercury. That intuitive ability could have actually aided in that wound in general. He could have been a very sensitive kid, even if he didn't display that information publicly per se, or felt the need to like hide that due to insecurity. Masculinity is what I'm feeling, like a need to like be tough. But struggles in relation to learning and communication like could have actually been and may still be sensitivity induced. So Russia and the Ukraine both break away ultimately from the USSR, right? Like that's the starting point. That is the heart. That is the motherland. I found it to be really, really fascinating that the USSR's chart is an 8-degree Capricorn sun. It bears conjunctions to both the Ukraine's North Node as well as Russia's North Node, but the conjunction to Russia's North Node is stronger. I'm mentioning this because what it's showing me is that the USSR and the influence of the USSR is very much so felt a whole lot more in relation to Russia's purpose and Russia's path, which is so stereotypically true. Like that's Putin's fight. At least it's part of his fight. I know he changes this debate momentarily. But one of the main fights that he has posed in relation to the Ukraine and why they should be able to just take it back is because it belongs to Russia, i.e. the USSR. Yet when you look at these two entities separately, that's when it gets really, really crazy because the chart for the Ukraine places the North Node in Capricorn in the first house, while the chart for Russia now places the North Node in Capricorn in the 5th house. What this is ultimately showing me is that the Ukraine in general, the purpose of the Ukraine as a nation is to branch away from partnership themes ultimately and to liberate themselves in their authority and in their ability to become industrialized and in their ability to grow and build and do all of these things on their own independently. But then you look at Russia and you see the North Node in Capricorn in the 5th, and you can see that their purpose is ultimately to gain confidence in themselves, to not require or need the acceptance and the togetherness of a group in order to thrive, to stand on their own confidently in their creations and to will things into being. Very literally, potentially, the creation of technology or other humanly advancing things. So Russia does not want to release the Ukraine to allow them to gain their autonomy independently. Yet the key, ultimately, in that situation is for Russia to be confident in themselves. It was so crazy to me when I did take note of this, because in the very beginning of the Russia and Ukraine conflict, one of the things that I heard in relation to it was that Russia needed to release the past. Now, obviously, knowing Russia and Ukraine, knowing the situation, this seems very logically, true. Like, no shit, that's exactly what they need to do. But it's beyond that, because I heard this intuitively. And looking at the charts, I can see that entirely. I can see it, and Putin is a major factor in that, because what Putin has that does impact this entire situation is Uranus in Cancer at 18 degrees, which is just a whole clusterfuck of messy, because this 18-degree point doesn't impact Russia. I mean, it's a very wide conjunction to Russia's south node, but it does impact the Ukraine. He pulls them back to the past. He makes it impossible for them to move forward. Meaning, Putin pulls people to the past. But even beyond that, the reason why this is so important, South Node conjunctions in general, they are very important. But the reason why it's even more important for Putin in particular is because this Uranus in Cancer that conjuncts both of those South Nodes is the ruler of his North Node in Aquarius. Very realistically, the simplest way to explain this is that Putin is not a good leader in this situation. Not even really technically for Russia, because he is still messing with them too. His Uranus is all up there opposing the other planets in Capricorn that are in Russia's chart. Plus, it's all just a bid for power, because he's trying to use Russia to heal himself from the wound. But then it is really kind of funny to bring the United States into the mix as well and have them provide funding to the Ukraine, because the United States is pretty much acting as an opposing force for Russia in order for Russia to move forward, which again, logically, yes, but it's in the chart as well. With the United States Sun at 13 Cancer, it's conjunct Russia's South Node. But that truth can be seen within the charts, because the two nations as a whole essentially conflict with Putin's purpose. He is not the man for the job. Which again, no shit, but it's seen within the astrology. It's reflected within the astrology. It was really crazy to me when I was considering Uranus in Cancer and Putin's North Node just conjunct his IC. Both of these themes are relating to this whole human family theme, but family as a whole is a major theme too. And when I began to think about that, I was like, that is absolutely insane, because where did Russia come from? Russia came from the families. The House of Romanov was in power in Russia between 1613 and 1917. When was the USSR formed? 1922. Putin has a connection and a hold on very, very deep roots within Russia. But I do believe that Putin's inner circle is also referenced as the family, which takes us to the GRU and the FSB, and that's not, although I find it so fascinating, that is not something that I really want to go into while reading all of this. That would require a reading all on its own. I did find the Neptune conjunctions to the nodes to be really, really interesting within the charts of the Ukraine as well as Russia. And the reason why I found it to be interesting is because the USSR's chart had a Pisces south node. There's one thing about the Soviets that many people are aware of, and that is their in-depth research as well as honoring of the occult, ESP, psychic phenomenon, and ultimately how they could use that to their advantage. So it was fascinating to me to see that understanding and that wisdom of the other world, of the unseen, carry over into both of their charts and ultimately influence both nations with that understanding. They understand the spiritual. They understand the mysticism. They understand the lore and the what's possible. But both nations, again, are being asked to utilize this to claim authority for themselves, to utilize this capacity to dream, very, very largely, to dream themselves into their ideal situations. And those ideal situations are very, very largely authority-based. They're business-based. They're economy-based. They're big business-based. Capricorn in general is very much so big business. It's the sea goat that rose from the sea to bring the gifts of civilization to mankind. I made the comment at one point that the asset to the Ukraine in relation to Russia and their ability to fight Russia ultimately is in their ability to plan. They have the ability to plan in a way that is very, very secret. It is in covert operation. With Mars in Virgo within their chart at 25 degrees and trine their nodal axis at 18 Capricorn, even if that is wide, it is so important to take note of the fact that transit Pluto in Capricorn is resting in the first house of the Ukraine's chart, and it is trining this Mars. It's covert action. It's their ability also to pull from the resources of others. But planning in secret is a major asset, and that is not something that Russia has. Not saying that Russia doesn't have its own assets in the situation, but Ukraine's is very, very largely the covert operation, special operation type stuff. Well, Russia's ability to fight is much more travel-based. After I said this, I obviously considered, like land, sea, ports, all of the different access that Russia does have to the Ukraine, the halting that they've done to a lot of access and borders, etc. Mars and Sag. But I do also remember that being like a major component in some of the themes of what they were fighting for, right? Something with like them being upset about the Ukraine having these ports in general, or there was something to it. I don't know. I haven't followed it too closely. Again, I'm reading blind. Mars in Sagittarius, it's much more explorative, adventurous, which also makes them a lot more likely to act on a whim, to do things in the moment with fire behind their ass. And actually, they kind of suck at planning probably in general with this Mars square Jupiter in Virgo, because their planning would get messed up potentially due to them potentially making mistakes. Like, that's what I'm feeling when looking at this, like making mistakes in the process of planning, or maybe even in the process of executing those plans. For them both to have Saturn and Aquarius, these two nations both have such industrialized energy, technology, and the advancement of technology. For Russia, you're seeing that potential being even more so potentially within the medical field or service related field. Uranus and Aquarius, robotics, electronics, AI, that realm of being. I say robotics, I mean robotics from the standpoint of utilizing something that would be of service, that would solve, that would work. That's what they're doing with technology as a whole, or should be, ultimately. That's their aim there. It's a solution-oriented mechanism. Well, for the Ukraine, their ability to master that path with Saturn in the first house is to put in the work. They got to put in the work themselves. Another thing that I did find to be really fascinating is that Russia's moon is at 2 degrees Virgo, which makes it conjunct the Ukraine sun. The entire situation, which has led to so much tragedy and just horribleness in general. At the same time, when I look at these two charts together, I feel like I'm looking at two brothers. almost like a younger one and an older one. And the older one is bullying the younger one and stopping them from progressing forward on their own, because the older one doesn't have enough confidence in himself to stand solo. Putin could take some sort of erratic action this next month, ultimately, which I already kind of speculated at anyways, with the US's Pluto return arriving again and Russia making its debut right during our Pluto return. We are tied into this, especially through funding in relation to Ukraine. That was so strange. When I said that, I got a flash of NATO. Which again, I need to keep saying, I know that these are obvious things. However, NATO has 11-degree cardinal energy too. The 3rd of July, right around like the first week in July as a whole, we'll just leave it open. That time frame could very much so perpetuate conflict between Russia and NATO ultimately could be involved in it. But Putin would obviously be the one that instigated this, started this. Yet there is also a really good chance that he could get a very, very firm slap on the wrist later into Cancer season. I wonder if NATO could even potentially take some action around that first week in July, because they also have Aries, Mars and Aries. They could even be the first to take action, but it would be like Putin's response to that. Again, though, his reprimanding would be not long after. It would be around the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th of July. Wrist slap, bad Putin. I was told months and months ago that before Putin, and I mean clairaudibly, before Putin had the chance to push that red button, that he would be assassinated, that would not occur. His actions around the very end of July, especially ones that involve monetary expansion or potentially even business partnership related themes, forming partnerships with people that can help him monetarily. This is a precursor to whatever does transpire when he has Saturn oppose his Pluto and then later conjunct his North Node. If there were to be some sort of assassination attempt that was big against Putin's life, I would say that it would be August or September that I would see the potential for that. And I very much so see that being the culprit of Putin's demise over something health-related. The health-related stuff, that doesn't even come into head in full until April 2023. The last time that Putin experienced these conjunctions from Saturn to his North Node, as well as Saturn opposing Pluto, opposing his South Node. The Saturn conjunction to the North Node began around March, mid-March it looks like, but the earlier end of mid-March. And then the opposition to Pluto would have been in the first week of April. I don't know what was going on with Putin around that time, what reprimanding was going on in his life, as well as what threats potentially even could have been in his life. But this is what he's about to revisit, and he's revisiting it due to the retrograde notion in a backwards way, where he's revisiting the April time period first and then the March time period next, August, September. Which is really fascinating that I did say that about assassination in general, because it was reported. I remember, I just Googled it to refresh my memory, but there was a report of him, and it was by the Kremlin, surviving an assassination attempt in March. I don't know. We will see. I really don't want to make very big predictions in relation to Russia, Ukraine, that conflict, or any of that as a whole. I've been feeling so pulled to read this, and today it feels a little bit more open than the last time that I simply tried to assess Putin's chart as a whole. The key to Putin and what is his downfall is the unpredictable. He is a man that needs to be taken off guard, essentially, in order to be taken down. And when I say that, I do not mean that in an assassination kind of way. I'm saying in general, that is it. It's shock and allure. It's the ability to do things suddenly. He suffers in these situations, especially during cardinal seasons, such as Cancer season. Having Mars in the second house drive for him as a whole is entirely monetary. His drive in life is entirely monetary. It's why he's been able to acquire for himself so largely. And that drive is very, very worldly. It's the ability to acquire globally. And this Mars is also trying his Pluto. Yeah, Putin can stand up there all he wants and make very vast claims about invading Ukraine over Nazism and just all of the speculation and mind fucking that he's doing, we will say. But it's monetary. It's absolutely monetary. Russia is full of secrets and allure, and Putin fits in very, very well as an 8th house moon, as well as Venus in the 1st house. I want to take note that it is 1, 2, 3, 4 as I am checking this, because I have a feeling that there's something I'm going to find here. Yes, I did remember this correctly, that the founding of the Romanov dynasty, Putin's Venus was conjunct the Romanov south node, while his Jupiter was conjunct the Romanov north node for this February 21st, 1613 date. And I know that there is a lot of mystery and allure behind the occultism in Russia, and certain family lines still running things behind the scene, we will say. But that is more speculation, and I'm trying to stick to very clear truths here. Because the truth of the matter is that with the splitting away from the USSR, the Ukraine and Russia as their own sole entities, they're leaving the family behind. And that may be a thing, that may be a theme, and that may be the entire issue. But the thing about Putin here, Mr. Putin, is that he's an Aquarius North Node. He's supposed to be moving forward. He's supposed to be evolving. He's supposed to be humanitarian. He's supposed to be doing, bettering the world potentially via technology and things that are ahead of their time in some capacity. He's not supposed to be stuck in the past. So why is he so stuck in the past? I know why he's so stuck in the past. Because he has Jupiter square the nodes and it's karmic. He can't let go of the need for security. It is monetary, as I've said already before. Putin has a tendency to be caught off guard with this Uranus-Neptune square. He has a tendency to be caught off guard. He has a tendency to be surprised. He probably has PTSD from these surprises. It's why he's gone about in other ways of his life to cultivate control. But his Achilles heel is the surprises. It is the shock value. That is his weakness, his kryptonite, we could say. Which again goes back to the FSB, and it goes back to the GRU, and probably why he has been so involved with doing things that are very covert. And that is not to say that Russia as a whole, and Russian government, we could say, is not already very, very involved in their secretive service operations, we will say. That has long, vast history. But why did that begin? What family was executed as a whole that motivated that? It's 234, so let me tell you, I know that I am full of truths today. Even if the formation and the growth of Russians' foreign service and secret service did probably largely begin with the KGB, that need to protect from attack that is covert, that 100% came from those damn Romanovs. Don't lie to me. You can't trick a trickster, and I know that I just heard that clairaudiently for a reason, because Putin is indeed an 8th house moon in Gemini. Because that is his way of ensuring that he is not surprised. To hold and yield so much power and so much authority within a public sector, and to have that ability to greatly influence people's beliefs via the ability to tap into their insecurities and ultimately their fears. He has many, many markers and many pointers to make a great leader. But it's this Jupiter. This Jupiter is the issue. It's his desire to acquire more. Which is so ironic and so symbolically fitting because that Jupiter does square his nodal axis, and Putin himself is not the man for the job for either Russia or for Ukraine to begin with. So it's like there ultimately to mess that process up. It's just, like a little bit shitty when that does involve putting so many people's lives at risk. If Putin thought this life was hard for him in the beginning, oh honey. He knows the right people to make things happen. He knows the right people to assist him in fulfilling what he wants to will into being, quote unquote. But again, that willing ability is placing him in the past. He's not to be within this area. He's not to actually even be too public per se. And he's definitely not to be driven by ego. The biggest concern, as I have repeated over and over again, for Putin himself is the shock value. It's the unpredictable. It's the things that he does not see coming. And I keep getting something very, very specifically about the Neptune square to Uranus, like that being what assisted him in creating such a fortress for himself when it comes to being able to hide. Because he has had instances where he definitely was surprised, tricked, deceived, fooled. Things were not clear. He didn't see it coming. But that's also the answer to stopping him ultimately. And it is very ironic to me because the United States sun does conjunct this Uranus. So we, the people, do have this tendency probably on occasion to kind of knock Mr. Putin on his ass by surprise. And not only that, but also to lay down a heavy karmic hammer in the process and force him to deal with his actions, i.e. sanctions. The biggest threat to our ability to do that is in the people that he does know and in his allies and in the other people that he can lean on and ultimately get to join his cause. But also, which may seem obvious again, but I'm pointing it out because it is something specific, in things like him carrying around that briefcase as a way of fearing people or threatening nuclear war as a way of fearing people. That's him tapping into the Pluto sextile from that Libra energy in the 12th house. The ability to instill and bring about fear. But he has a big Achilles heel. Like I said, he can be deceived. But yeah, I'm not seeing anything else that I am feeling pulled to at this very moment in time. So I am going to release this. If I do feel pulled in the future, I will do this again. But for now, I think that I threw out enough dates and made enough predictions, one could say, for the current time.